as we have been happens is you kind of recoil, and that's what leads us to the third verse. Yena rupam rasam verse. What else remains here unknowable to this Atman, through which people perceive or experience color, taste, smell, sound, touch, and sexual pleasure. This indeed is that self that was asked by Nachiketa.
Could you announce if the stream quality is no good for voice for Vedanta to go over to Swami Satyamayana channel?
Yeah, those who are watching the live stream on this Vedanta org channel, they could switch over to Swami Satyam is bad. So we'll have this slight.
It's the internet connection. Some complaints, connection issues here. So
Yeah, so we can kind of go ahead. I think it should, even the last time we had some to Yena, through which people experience color, taste, smell, sound, touch, and sexual pleasure. That is, Yena, Rupam, Rasam, Gandham, Shabdam, the rest of the verses. This indeed is that self. This was a self, this was the Atman, this was the reality which Nachiketa was asking the god of death. What is this self? What is this self which is beyond virtue and vice, which is the highest state of Vishnu, and which is different from even what the gods know? Even the gods were kind of that we know. He, in his own words, it is in and through the self that I know this table and this chairs. I know in and through the self. The self can never be objectified. Yeah, but then you know everything through the self that is consciousness. And it is through that consciousness that you know things. And now Sri Ramakrishna gives a nice example. And that is, suppose you're kind of preparing some soup, you're boiling some soup, you've chopped in some vegetables and you've thrown in the soup, and the vegetables are kind of dancing around, playing, saying, "Oh wow!" The vegetable will say, "Yeah, I'm conscious," while the water will say, "Well, I'm." The soup will say, "I'm hot, I'm heated." That's the reason why my heat is being transferred to you. The container will say, well, it is my heat. I'm transferring that heat from myself to the water. That kind of issues out.
yeah, there's a lot of problems with the streams, but unless you're willing to relocate right now, yeah, then we'll just have to experience
Yeah,
difficulties.
fine. We will continue. So it is this consciousness that kind of is a light within. And that light, as with all light, it well, the intellect thinks, yeah, I am conscious. The mind thinks, I am conscious. The senses think, I am conscious. And somehow we have been kind of misled with this. So, this Upanishad is telling us exactly that you need to go down to your source. And once you can go down to your source, you will see that this consciousness is a basis of all our experiences, this world. So it is in a way trying to get us back here. There is a small book of Vedanta called Drik and Drishya Viveka. Drik is the seer and Drishya is that which is seen. One will have to analyze what is the seer and what is the seen. Well, my eyes see this external object. Well, my mind can see my eyes, and my intellect can see the mind. So here we have a graded level of, can say, existence between the seer and the seen. We know that what is seen is outside, is objective. The seer, in comparison with that, in reference to that, is more inside. And as we keep on going more and more and more inside, we find that we are getting better and better in understanding ourselves. So it's always necessary for us to take into account this self. And this self, what remains here unknown to the self, through which this very self people experience color, taste, sound, touch, and sexual pleasure. That is the sense organs, the Gyanendriya as they are called, and the Karmendriya, the motor organs, the sensory and the motor organs. They are all functioning because of that consciousness behind. And this is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. So we find that there is nothing here other than that consciousness. This consciousness is reflected in each and everything. As the Upanishads and as the Vedantas says, that from the clump of grass to the highest, you can say, being called the creator, is that self, the Atman, reflected in all things. So what should we do? In the previous verse, we had seen how we have to divest ourselves from these external things. Why should we divest ourselves? Because that is not our center of gravity. We are being led out and being caught up in the snares of desires and work and ignorance. Once we can take ourselves back, take a fine, good, long look at ourselves, then what happens is we find that we are able to get back to ourselves. You know, when Swami Vivekananda, one of the first times when he had met Sri Ramakrishna, he had sung a song, Mano cholo nijo niketani. O my mind, let us go back to our own abode. Why do you wander about in this foreign land, in a foreign dress? So let's go back. This is, and Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna had gone into a samadhi. Here also, we are trying to understand this self. And we have spread ourselves out so much. This is mine, that is mine. Well, and we are every time we are saying this is mine, that is mine, we are kind of shocked into our senses after a while, and we find that nothing really is ours. Swami Vivekananda says, even these bodies are coming and going by the laws of nature. Why do you have to bother about it? Nothing really is yours. Even this body we were discussing this morning, we found that every 7 years the body undergoes a total change. All the old material, almost all the material is replaced by new material. And yet we feel that I am that same person who was born like that. This is not the body we were born with. We have changed. What makes us feel that this is mine, that is mine, this is the... It is, as you say, a wrong perception. The experiencer is there, but the perception of that experiencer is kind of leading him or her away from the reality. So once you retract yourself, once you bring yourself back in, you will find the basis of everything as that consciousness, and that consciousness is that self, and it's that self that needs to be realized. That's what he's saying. What else remains here unknown to the self? Because it is in and through the self that you can know everything, you can experience everything. Go down to the experiencer. Why do we need also to even be aware of the experience? It's like we are looking at the skies. Where do you actually perceive the skies? Where do you actually perceive the world? Within you. It's always like that. It is within us, it is within the mind that we actually perceive everything. And that is why we must understand that somewhere deep down, very deep down, that is the basis of our being. That is the basis of our reality. That is the basis of ourselves, that consciousness. So this is the reason why saying you need to get back to yourself. Don't go for the objective experience. Go down to the subject, the experiencer. The next verse is, we are having some problems with the connectivity, and that's the reason why we are having this problem with the transmission. The next verse is Swapnantam jagaritantam chobho yenan pashyanti mahantam vibhumatmanam matva dhiro nasochati. Having realized the great and all-pervading self through which a person perceives the objects in both the sleep and in the waking states, knowing that a wise person does not grieve. This is another significant verse. So, Mahantam Vibhum Atmanam. This is a kind of Mahantam. It's great. Vibhum is all pervading, this self. See, after you have come down to back to your subjective side, the consciousness, when you have retracted yourself, come back to the experiencer. Now the nature of this experiencer is being spoken about. What is this consciousness, this experiencer? It is great, it is all pervading, and it is the perceiver of the contents of your sleep as well as everything in the waking state. Now, when you look at this, when you go to sleep or even when you are awake, what fills your mind is the objects, the contents of our consciousness is the objects, sound, touch, taste, smell, etc. And what are the contents of a consciousness in dreams? The same thing that you had seen in the waking state, those impressions are there and they emerged, but sometimes in a kind of a mixed manner. And as a result, you see a dream. So you are aware of the contents of that consciousness, the dreams, the various dreams. You are not aware of consciousness itself. It is like that lamp that is illumining all the objects, but we see saying the only the objects. So here the Upanishad says that great all pervading self, which is the experiencer, which is of the nature of consciousness, and saying that consciousness experiences or perceives or sees the waking state as well as the dream state, and by implication the deep sleep state also. So knowing this, a wise person does not grieve. This is the result of the previous verse, the results of getting back into yourself, knowing your consciousness, that experiencer. And what's the nature of that consciousness? This is the result. This is the fruit of that knowing the experiencer. It is great, it is all pervading. But when you say, oh, well, is my self, the Atman, which is here in the body, is it great, all pervading? Yes, in Vedanta, it has to be understood that both this individual soul and the supreme soul are actually one. When one realizes one individual soul, one simultaneously realizes one supreme soul. The supreme soul, not one, the supreme soul. Because they are not different. So, yena anupashyanti, through which one experiences, one sees what? That jagaritantam and swapnantam, the contents of the consciousness in sleep as well as dream. When you say, through that consciousness, I thought the consciousness was mine. There is no my consciousness or your consciousness in the ultimate sense of the word. It is one consciousness, and that one consciousness is being reflected in millions and millions and billions of, you can say, reflected surfaces, reflecting surfaces. And that consciousness is, as it were, reflected. Where is it reflected? In the intellect, in the mind. That's where it's reflected. So the one becomes the many through Maya. Or the one remains a one, it is reflected as the many in these millions and billions of living beings everywhere. So what is real? That one. And my individual self, what about me? That is the reflection, that consciousness is a reflection of that Supreme Self. Is the Supreme Self far away or do I need to take a kind of a journey from the individual to the supreme? No. If you have been following some of these previous verses, you will find it's being spoken that you should merge the senses in the mind, merge the mind in the intellect, and merge the intellect in the great self, and the great self in the supreme self. So it's a kind of a telescoping one thing into another, slowly, slowly. That supreme self itself is appearing as the individual self, as individual consciousness. And that is why we are kind of mistaken that this individual self is different from the supreme self. It is not different. The Jivatma and the Paramatma, the individual soul and the supreme soul, are actually one entity. When spoken of from the standpoint of the body and the mind and etc., it is spoken of as the individual soul. That individual soul itself is the supreme soul. And once this is understood, then this makes sense. Mahantam Vibhumatmanam. That is, the person, the intelligent person, Dhir, realizes that great self, all pervading, and that person overcomes all grief. In the Chandogya Upanishad, we have a sage, Sanat Kumar, telling the sage Narada, teaching the sage Narada. And Narada has kind of had gone to ask him, what is that through which you know everything? And he had also said, well, that is actually, Narada actually says that Tarati Shokam Atmavid, the knower of the self, crosses all grief. So when you say the knower of the self crosses all grief, here this is an echo here. Matva dhiro na sochati. That person who realizes the Atman overcomes all grief. And what does the person has to gain? Well, he or she has gained everything. There is nothing else to be gained, to be known, once you know the self. And when you know the self, the Atman, what happens? You know the whole universe. It's a tremendous statement, you see. How do you know everything? How do you know all life? Know the Atman. How do you know this whole universe? By knowing the Atman. So you and the Atman, are they different? No. This is where they are one. So once you know that, you know everything. You know the entire spectrum of existence. And once you know the entire spectrum of existence, what happens is, well, the person overcomes grief. It's as simple as that. And once you can understand this is that self. It is in the innermost, that consciousness, the subject. It is not the I. The I is a kind of it's way down. People mistake the I for consciousness. It cannot be. For the simple fact is, in deep sleep, your I disappears. If that I was a factor, constant factor in consciousness, it would not be merged in deep sleep. When you go into a swoon, or you go to a headache, or you're distracted, your I also is kind of distracted. That's the reason why we find that this I. People say, who am I? Who am I? Oh, they run around in circles. This consciousness is beyond the I. It is also beyond the you. It is beyond all categories. There is nothing but the I. And as we slowly get into this mode of inquiry, we transcend all grief. So, what is beyond grief? Well, the nature of this self, the Atman, is called Sat and Chit and Ananda. It is bliss. It's indescribable bliss. You just cannot kind of comprehend it. It's incomprehensible. It's huge. There is nothing in the world anymore that can make you sad. There is nothing in this whole, you can say, existence can drag you down. You become the self of even the gods. Even the gods, they cannot harm you, cannot hurt you. And here we are, this Atman is there, your real nature. And this real nature has to be realized. So, having realized the great and all pervading self, why great? Because there is nothing greater than that. And why all pervading? I thought you would say, well, we are talking about this Atman inside. Yes, the Atman is all pervading. This Atman is Brahman. And that's the reason why what is limited cannot be all pervasive. The body is limited. It is born and it will die. The senses are limited. It will be born and will die. The mind is limited, though its limitation is much, you can say, extensive. Its limits are more extensive than the body's. Even that is a limitation. Everything is a limitation. So once you come to something which has no limitations, you find that it's all pervading. And if it is a real knower, it knows the universe, it is omniscient. So you have omniscience, you have all pervasiveness. But what about me? What about my individuality? Well, your individuality is actually the universality. It is because we have contracted ourselves into a small kind of cage or a prison. We feel bound. And once you come out of this cage, this prison, this hole in the ground, as it were, you emerge out into the light. You emerge into your real individuality. That which is unchanging, that which is great, that which is all pervading, that which is omniscient. And that is your self, your nature, your Atman. So, having realized a great and all pervading self, through which a person perceives the objects in both the sleep and the waking states, a wise person does not grieve anymore. The next verse is Yaimam madvadam veda atmanam jivamantika Ishanam bhuta bhavyasya natato vijagupsate etadvaitat. Anyone who knows this self as non-different from oneself, antikat. And what is the nature of the self? Again, is being described. The enjoyer of the fruits of work, the supporter of life, and so on, as well as the Lord of the past and the future, does not want to save the self just because of that knowledge. This indeed is that. This indeed is the Atman. We will stop here now because we have some connectivity problem. This internet is bad today. What we will do is we will take some of these ideas up again next Wednesday. When we take up this class next Wednesday, we'll take this up again, and we will kind of, because there are many folks here who are also on this stream that couldn't view this live stream.
It's streaming fine.
This is
Yeah, this one's okay.
okay. So since this is streaming fine, we will take this up. Okay, I was worried about not being able to kind of transmit. Ya imam madvadam veda atmanam jivamantika ishanam bhutabhavyasya na tato vijagupsate. This person has attained to the state of fearlessness. And the Upanishad is saying, any one of us who knows their Atman, their self, as non-different from the Supreme Self. The word uses antikat, approximately. The Supreme Self, as we have mentioned, is not very, you can say, distinct from you, different from you, or far away from you. Once you know that this consciousness is actually the Supreme Consciousness. And when you know, anyone who knows this self as non-different from oneself, what's this? The qualifications or the kind of the qualities are given. The enjoyer of the fruits of work, madvadam. Madhu is the results of work. One who is the enjoyer of all the results of work. One who is also the supporter of life, and so on, as well as. So here we have a distinct explanation of yourself as the experiencer of all the fruits of your work and the support of your life, the life and everything here. So you have the individual self, the individual Atman or the Jivatman spoken. At the same time, just reverse this. There's an obverse and reverse to the same thing. So this self is spoken of as the individual self. Reverse it, and they say, as the Lord of the past and the future. As the Lord of the past and future, that is the Lord. It is the Lord, the great Lord, the self. There is no Lord as separate from the self. It transcends time. It is eternal. The past and the future, by implication, also the present. So the present also is. So everything in this world has got death as its shadow. Everything has got death in the form of time. Kala, time, is also Kala, death. So this transcends death, this transcends time, the Supreme Self, and this also transcends everything which is time and space are always conjoined. You transcend space, and when you transcend space, you transcend everything that is gross and limited. So you transcend the whole universe. You experience your eternal nature. That's the idea of the Lord of the past as well as the future. Ishanam, that one, that which controls. Ishitva. Bhutabhavyasya. And then what happens? So, tato na vijugupsate. That person does not want to hide or doesn't want to save oneself. Save oneself. Why should a person try to save oneself? Because that person has realized that Supreme Self as the subject, and there is nothing other than this Supreme Self. Wherever there are two, there is fear. That person has attained the state of fearlessness. That's why Yajnavalkya, he says in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad to Janaka, you have attained that state of fearlessness. You have attained that state of Brahman. And why does a person want to save himself? When the person wants to save himself, when the person is frightened. Frightened of what? Of death, of injury, of illness, of hundreds of things, from things which he or she considers external as enemies. When this person has realized himself or herself as the universe, what else is there for that person to get frightened about? That is why this is the kind of a the prasangsha vakya, as they say, in order to praise this knowledge. Everything is smitten with duality, smitten with fear, smitten with uncertainty, and this person is beyond these qualities of what you call the nature. So we have this third verse. We will take up the next verse, fourth verse. Sorry, this is the fifth verse. We will take the sixth verse. But we will, in a way, go through these verses once again, briefly, in order to kind of refresh the argument. And then we'll proceed forward. Because as we've seen, there was some kind of disturbance in the connectivity, and we'd like all the people to be kind of in on this thing. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.